So, it's 4 p.m. That means we're about to start with part 3 of our landscape talks. Unfortunately, I only have 3 of my 6 speakers. We're still waiting for 3 people, so please bear with us. We will start in a few minutes. So the good news is that I now have 4 out of 6 speakers. We're still waiting for 2. Let's give them a couple more minutes, and then we will start. Okay. Dr. Eric Patrick, are you somewhere in the audience? Because I was told that people have seen him here. And then Yelmen Hase. If you're here, please wave, come to the front. All right, then we're going to start with the 4 speakers. Thank you so much for waiting. The wait was worth it, because now we'll go directly to our first speaker of this last session of the Landscape Talks. It is Mike Zrust. He is the Chief Technical Officer of Lestari Capital, and he will be here to talk about catalyzing markets to deliver conservation. Welcome to the stage. And yeah. I had told the audiences before, I'm telling you again, we clap after I introduce somebody, and we clap after the person is done. And for my speakers, please use the whole stage. Don't just stand there in the corner. Thank you very much.
Hi, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for coming. This is a great opportunity to talk to you about some of the work that we've been doing recently to develop the Sustainable Commodities Compensation Mechanism. And before I start going into the mechanism itself, I'm going to give you a little bit of a background, a little bit of context. So for those of you who don't know, the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil, the RSPO, has developed a mechanism for identifying historical liability caused within the system by growers through historical clearance of land prior to doing an environmental impact assessment. And so what this system does, effectively, it uses proxies to calculate the size of that liability, and it calculates the final liability per member of the RSPO, or a grower member of the RSPO, either in hectares or a dollar figure. And it also provides some level of guidance on how to actually compensate that liability. But however, challenges still exist in the system. I'll go into that a little bit. So what we have here is effectively a source of demand for conservation projects, because that liability has to go into conservation projects. That demand is in effect structured and it's codified by the RSPO, but we have companies who currently don't necessarily know where that funding should go. At the same time, we have many projects in Indonesia specifically, where we're focusing as our initial geographic area. We have many projects which are suffering from a systemic lack of long-term finance. Now, this is really where the SECM comes in. This is really in the middle here. It's linking the demand and the supply together. Now, inside the SECM is a fund, and that fund aggregates the liability from the demand side, from the growers, and then through structured payments over 25 years, which is stipulated by the RSPO, it puts that funding towards the conservation projects. Now, inside that fund, also in the medium term, it makes impact investing, and that impact investing creates returns which then allow the system to be self-sustaining in the long term. So we've been at this now for almost 2 years, well, actually over 2 years, developing this. And so I thought that I would share some sort of lessons learned, some takeaways from actually the way that the system has worked. The first thing, really, is the scalability of this. Now, the RSPO is really a trailblazer in this. They have really ventured into a place which not many sustainability standards have been willing to date to go into. But now imagine that you could actually start to replicate this, that you could get those externalities valued within other certification systems. Let's think of beef, of soy, of sugar, of rubber. And actually, in some of these commodities, the impact actually on deforestation, let's say, is actually much greater than necessarily palm oil. So the system as such, using that market-linked demand from the commodities to put financing into conservation, could be linked to lots of other commodities that we have around the world. And so what we're really saying here is that not necessarily create projects and then try to find the demand for them, is actually work with the commodity market to create the demand for the projects. Now, the second thing, this sort of came as a bit of a surprise to us, but a very pleasant surprise, is that when we first initially started thinking about the system, we were really looking at the primary producer. We were looking at the growers on the ground. But actually what we've managed to do is inadvertently create a system that other nodes of the supply chain can utilize. Now let's take financial institutions as that example. And the first thing is that those financial institutions actually have very high level of exposure to the palm oil market. And this could be because they provide financial services to them, but they also have their own sustainability commitments, which they need to comply with. So through those relationships that they actually have with the growers, with their clients, they can actually start to pull in. They can actually leverage those relationships to pull in a much greater number of the players that have the liabilities on the ground, that cause the externalities on the ground. But this is actually absolutely applicable also to other actors. You could think of traders, you could think of manufacturers, you could think of retailers, you could even think actually of consumers in this way. The issue right now is that those standards for those specific actors in the supply chain, they don't yet exist. Those standards there actually valuing the externalities that they cause aren't there. So those are really two main points that I would like to just kind of raise with you to think about. Lastly, there is still a long way to go. As I said, the RSPO has really been a trailblazer in this. But actually, what we need to do is we need to start working with the other sustainability standards to really truly incorporate the cost of the environmental impact into the operations. Now, that is a way that we can then start to drive better performance. We can drive the sector to move into areas which are not forested, for example. We can really try to bring the cost of damaging rivers into the cost of operations. Now, secondly, is that we really need to speed up the development of such systems. It took 7 years in the RSPO. I felt every single day of those meetings for 7 years. Really, to try to get these systems up and running, we really need to move forward relatively quickly. Thirdly, the whole supply chain should actually be involved in this. The responsibility for the development, for the expansion of commodity products doesn't just rest with the growers. The whole supply chain is actually responsible. And lastly, an important point, I think, quite close to my own heart, is that we really need to start working with the projects on the ground. Some of those projects are ready. They're certified under international standards. But many of them are not. And so let's not just go for the low-hanging fruits. Let's also go for the projects that need to be pulled up to become financeable within these systems and really try to demonstrate a lot of impact on the ground through this. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mike. Now, I just heard that Dr. Eric Patrick has arrived. We will give him some time. And in the meantime, we have a chance to listen to Christopher Eves. He is from the Zoological Society of London. And he will tell us about environmental, social, and governance issues from investments in commodity production. A big round of applause for him, please. Okay, I practiced with the group in the morning. I don't want that. So again, a big round of applause for him, please.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sorry, this isn't the right presentation. I can... Okay, maybe no presentation is better than the wrong presentation. Here we are. So, this summer, I had the opportunity to travel to the beautiful Rio Tambopata National Park in the Peruvian Amazon. A beautiful and biodiverse region, home to tapir, giant river otter, and jaguar. And one night, on a trek out into the forest, our guide invited us to simply switch off our head torches and listen to the sounds of the forest around us. Frogs, cicada, countless insects. And as we were immersed in this incredible soundscape, it was hard to imagine a place further away than this. And yet the decisions made here and in other financial centers around the globe are intimately linked to the fate of the world's remaining forests. So long as these decision makers are unable to distinguish between the responsible and the unsustainable use of natural resources, the results can and will be truly disastrous. No better example of this can be found than the 2015 haze crisis that choked Southeast Asia. An unprecedented environmental disaster, a health crisis for millions of people, and a loss to the Indonesian economy of over $16 billion. And at the heart of this crisis, the unsustainable production of pulp, paper, and palm oil, in turn supported by finance and services from investors and banks. Given the scale of these services and the capital offered by the finance sector, it's easy to see how they might be regarded as the sleeping giants in the battle against deforestation. By setting more stringent lending criteria and by engaging directly in the companies they invest in, the finance sector has the potential to drive large-scale change. And there are signs that this giant is awakening as they become more aware of the environmental, social, and governance risks that are tied to the value of their investments. These risks include ever more sophisticated civil society campaigns that are increasingly able to draw the link between finance flows and on-the-ground impacts. And they include risks that are more directly related to the financial value of their investments, such as declining productivity as a result of unsustainable land use practices, shifting regulation leading to the stranding of assets, such as we've seen with peatland regulation in Indonesia, direct loss of assets as a result of climate change and other man-made disasters, and social conflict and an associated loss of social license to operate. A sign of investor interest in ESG risks is a number of signatories to the UN-backed Principles for Responsible Investment. Since its launch in 2006 at the New York Stock Exchange, these principles have attracted over 1,700 signatories who collectively manage over $70 trillion worth of assets. These signatories commit to incorporate ESG risks in their due diligence processes and to seek appropriate disclosures about ESG risks from the companies that they invest in. And with these commitments comes growing information needs. And it was to help meet these information needs that the Zoological Society of London established the Sustainability Policy Transparency Toolkit, or also known as SPOT. SPOT assesses publicly available information to determine the presence or absence of company policies, disclosures, and commitments as they relate to ESG risks. It then provides this information to investors, ESG analysts, buyers, and other supply chain stakeholders. SPOT assesses 50 of the largest palm oil producers and traders, and as of 2017, 24 timber, pulp, and paper producers operating in landscapes at high risk of deforestation and degradation. The SPOT assessment results are held on an online platform where users can review, filter, and download data to inform their due diligence activities. Users can also delve into the data and look at individual company assessments against an indicator framework that draws from FSC, RSPO, UNGRI, and other standards. They can also access a media monitor that collates positive and negative media stories on company activities to take a first look at whether companies are implementing their commitments. So what did we find during our first assessment of producers in the timber, pulp, and paper sector in the tropics? Well, firstly, we found that they need to do much more in terms of transparency and the development of policies. The average score for companies operating in this sector stood at 37%, whilst in 2017, the average score for palm oil producers was over 50%. This suggests that there's an urgent need for companies to respond to the ESG risks that they face. We also found that there's a need for companies to improve the way they report their land banks. This year, SPOT produced a report, Hidden Land, Hidden Risks, which found that inaccurate and incomplete reporting of land bank data in the palm oil sector was inhibiting accountability and leaving investors exposed to numerous social and environmental risks. We found a similar situation in the timber, pulp, and paper sector in the tropics. For instance, only 50% of the companies we assessed are even clearly disclosing the land bank that they manage. There's also a need for improvement in the forestry sector's engagement with indigenous peoples and local communities. Whilst 3/4 of the companies assessed on SPOT have a commitment to respect the rights of indigenous peoples and local communities, just 5 companies have a commitment to seek their free, prior, and informed consent. So long as these companies fail to seek this consent, at best, they run the risk of operating in landscapes without the support of local populations, and at worst, run the risk of long-term social conflict. An important tool in delivering biodiversity conservation, sustainable livelihoods, and more sustainable commodity production is, of course, the landscape approach. We found that just 7 of the 24 companies assessed on SPOT are implementing a landscape approach, suggesting that there's an urgent need to engage with these companies to get them to think outside of their concession areas and work towards sustainable commodity production at the landscape scale. One landscape where the companies assessed on SPOT are engaged is the Keola Sendang project, where ZSL and partners are working with the government of South Sumatra to develop a replicable and scalable landscape management model. Launched at the Global Landscape Forum back in 2015, Keola Sendang seeks to address the interlinked challenges of deforestation, peatland degradation, and wildfires, all while delivering green growth over 1.6 million hectares of land. SPOT supports this project by providing a link between the companies that operate in this landscape and their buyers and financiers. And in 2018, the ZSL SPOT team will be working with palm oil and timber, pulp, and paper producers within this landscape to try and better understand the challenges and opportunities associated with implementing group-level commitments. Finally, it's important to note that whilst the forestry sector appears to be lagging behind in terms of transparency, we found that over half of the companies assessed on SPOT are working with academics, NGOs, and government to try and improve the sustainability of forest products. This is an encouraging result because a willingness to work with such actors, to draw on the kind of expertise that we have here in the room today, coupled with a more responsible and better informed finance sector, can only lead to better results for people and for biodiversity. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chris. If you have questions about what Chris just talked about or questions to any of our speakers, please keep them. You'll get a chance to talk to our VIPs after the session. If we have some time after all the talks, then maybe we will do a question and answer session, but I can't promise that. It will depend on how much time the speakers use. We've told them only 7 minutes, but some of them may not stick to that. All right, so we now have Dr. Eric Patrick. He is an adaptation specialist at the International Fund for Agricultural Development, and he will tell us about multifunctional landscapes, asking the question, what is the right approach? A very warm welcome.
Right. This is for the slides, is it? Okay. All right, well, thank you for coming. And I'm going to, actually, before we get into my presentation, I'm going to tell a little story which I think is instructive of the topic I want to approach. I was doing my PhD research many years ago in a country in Africa, and I was interested in a technique called water harvesting, which many of you are probably familiar with, which can be done at different scales for different objectives, having different beneficiaries who have different levels of technical knowledge, capital requirements. And I found what I thought was a perfect field site. It was a place where there were 3 water harvesting projects which had all just completed. One was for range, for revegetation, one was for trees, and one was for cereals. They were in different parts of the landscape. They involved different types of development institutions. Several of them are here in this meeting. And it was quite interesting for me to go around and talk to the various stakeholders, both the beneficiaries and non-beneficiaries from the projects. And what struck me was that their perception was completely different from what I would have assumed. So what I saw was fences that had been removed and used for private property. I saw bunds, so things which, structures which stop water, which were flattened. I saw trees that were dead. I thought, my goodness, all these projects, all the millions of dollars invested, were completely wasted. But when I talked to people, I had the opposite, they had the opposite impression. They said, no, it's fantastic. During the 5 years, 7 years, whatever that these projects had operated, they had created employment for the youth in particular, paid employment. The materials had been able to be used as kraals for animals around people's huts. And many young people said, and it kept land out of the hands of the politically well-connected elders who would otherwise have grabbed it. In other words, people's criteria for a successful project was quite different from our own. If we looked at a log frame of the project, which I work on every day, we come with a certain set of cultural and other assumptions as to what a successful project would look like. So we try to manage the scale of complexity by defining a very narrow scope, and then we're surprised by how few of our projects are actually sustainable after the project funding ends. So the question we are asking ourselves then, especially in the business I'm in, which is basically doing agricultural development projects, basically looking at the field as a spatial context, basically looking at the household enterprise as our economic context, of how we can achieve multiple benefits as environmental and climate change considerations become more and more important as a context for our work. Now, fortunately, we access environment and climate finance, and we merge that, we blend that with our agricultural loans, and we're trying to come up with projects which increasingly are able to achieve these multiple benefits. And in order to do that, we're finding that we have to go beyond the field scale, that the field exists within a catena, a landscape where you could be different if you're at the bottom than you're at the top. And then you get into complexities of land tenure, and incentives. Well, can we get people at the top to do something different? Oh, that wasn't conceived of in the project. We're targeting these beneficiaries, et cetera, et cetera. So the question that we're basically facing operationally is, what is the tractable level of complexity? What is the trade-off from a project management perspective, very practically, and I might be coming from a different perspective than a lot of people in this workshop, I don't know, but what we are always under pressure to bring in mainstream this issue, mainstream that issue, mainstream. So how do we come to a practicable compromise in terms of integration and actual doability of the project within our time frames, within our budget, with the stakeholders that we need to work with, etc. So what I want to talk about today is one approach, which is a pilot. Actually, we're piloting an approach, and we're not doing this in isolation. Thanks to the Global Environment Facility, which many of you may have heard of. IFAD is the lead agency for a multi-stakeholder program of the GEF6, which is the current cycle, on sustainable and resilient approaches to achieving food security in sub-Saharan Africa. And that's what I'm going to briefly highlight today. So this is not the be-all and end-all, but I just want to highlight an approach that we're taking with partners, and you'll see who they are at the end when we put the logos up, to an approach that in most cases, in fact almost all cases, takes a landscape approach as a practical measure, not necessarily as an objective, but then attempts to go beyond that and look at how we could achieve these multiple objectives at different scales, and what stakeholders would be involved, which are different stakeholders at these different scales. So these are the countries that we're involved with. So there's 12 countries, and the last country was just approved in June, so the program is just starting. But we hope to be able to come back each year to these global landscape forums and report back on the approaches, the techniques, the practices that we feel are useful. So this is basically our theory of change. We call it EAT, engage, act, and track. It's actually nothing particularly revolutionary, but the idea of identifying and engaging the right stakeholders in the right forums, identifying what their different interests are, acting to define and identify proven multi-benefit practices in the landscape, so ones which have benefits for multiple stakeholders in the landscape, both on the criteria of environmental and agricultural development criteria, and then having a very concrete tracking of results so that we know in the next round what to scale up. This is the various countries you see at the bottom. We have these tied together by a regional project, or let's say cross-cutting project, which enables knowledge sharing as each of these 12 case studies of piloting this approach go on their different path in different contexts with different actors. You see at the bottom different agencies involved. And so we will start to generate, even in terms of by the next Global Landscape Forum, a lot of results in terms of which approaches are working, because frankly some of these projects were going to be mediocre and some of them are going to be outstanding. We don't know which ones yet. We're taking a portfolio approach to see which approaches work in which context. And the beauty of this, and I give Jeff the credit to this, for this, having done other Jeff-funded projects before, is that all of the projects have the same three components. So it's basically taking an agreed approach and applying it in all of them have the E, the A, and the T, and we're going to be comparing them in different contexts and to see which one, whether this approach works across multiple project contexts. If it does, then it's a robust approach. Okay, these are the different actors involved. And if you want more information about it, is Oliver here? If Oliver, you could just stand up. We've got a bunch of fact sheets there. And this is how you can contact us. So I'm going to be quite strict on myself to, as the time has run out, and it's just to generate interest, so we start to have a discussion. And we look forward to exchanging experiences on how to operationalize these complicated integrated approaches at different scales. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eric. Oh yeah, thanks, I'll take that. I'm especially grateful that you are the first person to mention Tanzania, or at least to show Tanzania, because I'm from Tanzania and I've only been hearing about other countries, Bangladesh, Indonesia, Tanzania, yeah. We're also part of, of what is happening in landscape issues. All right, so we have one speaker who is replacing another speaker. I'm happy that he could make it. Jelmen Haase. He's from the Belgian Alliance for Sustainable Palm Oil, and he will tell us about acting together to achieve change, and specifically, he will talk about Belgian and EU experiences. The stage is yours. Welcome.
Thank you very much. So, indeed, I'm here for the Belgian Alliance for Sustainable Palm Oil. That means we represent we represent industries, we represent individual members, and I see my PowerPoint can come. We represent individual members, so that is small and medium-sized enterprises, but also really big ones. We've got Egremont, that most of you might not know, but we've also got Ferrero, the Unilevers. We've also got sector members. So we represent the confectionery sector. We also represent, for example, the suppliers to industrial bakers and industrial bakers. I'm here to talk about palm oil. Palm oil is a tropical oil, and it comes from a fruit, and it's harvested, and then the oil is extracted much like you do from olive oil. There's a lot of misconceptions about that. Some think they take it from the trunk, much like rubber. Well, it's not. It's more like an olive, actually. It comes from a fruit. What I'm talking about here, actually, is then, okay, why is landscaping, why is moving to that level important for a European industry? It is a tropical oil, so by definition, we deal with a global environment, with a global and a very complicated supply chain. That means that, in particular for the smaller companies in Europe, they are not able to really identify those exact counterparts on the other side of the world. That means the other party, the counterpart, is unknown. How do you trust somebody that you do not know? How do you move from the unknown to a working business relation where you can then also sell a product to your customers that you say, okay, this meets our quality criteria. This meets our sustainability criteria. This is most often done through certification. We all know many labels, fair trade labels, Rainforest Alliance. So there's a plethora of labels, a plethora of certification mechanisms, a plethora of certification schemes that is available. And there lies my experience in the last 16 months. From this plethora of certification schemes, there were some voices that said it would be easier if you just had one that everybody could agree on. Just one label, one single certification scheme. The emotional response to that environment, we can all understand. For me too, I understood that as such. We did not argue for it, but we also did not argue against it. And that might have been my biggest mistake in the last 18 months. What the producing countries understood, Indonesia, Malaysia, Tanzania, forced to Tanzania, but yeah, of course, there was also Colombia, Ecuador. What they understood, what we did not understand, is if you move from this plethora of certification schemes, this plethora of labels, to just a single certification scheme, it might be that it is one European certification body that determines what enters Europe and what not. If it is this one third-party auditor that determines whether you are right or whether you are wrong, whether you're good or you're bad, then by definition that is protectionism. This was the beginning of what was close to a trade war. Letters, missions sent over, ministers coming over here from Indonesia, Malaysia, representations from industry from Colombia, Indonesia, Malaysia. And it even went as far as articles, statements in newspapers. We are a peace-loving country. But you do your thing and you allow us to do our thing. Who can stop 30 million people from mobilizing? We are going to fight the European resolution and so on. Language like that. And there we had to recognize that in this very complicated supply chain, industry is only one element. We are there, but there are so many others. And that is indeed where moving from this supply chain approach, this certification, to higher levels of landscape and even national levels could bring us closer together. We went to an effort and said, okay, we need to validate trustworthiness, we need to build trust, and we need to see how countries that are far apart can indeed enter into a dialogue. If you move from the supply chain to a higher level, you immediately are confronted with the Sustainable Development Goals. And there we found that we all have signed up to the same objectives. Whether it's people living on this side of the world, on the other side of the world, whether it's a producing country or one of our members here in Belgium or in Europe that is sourcing from those countries, we live in a region where they've signed up to the same objectives. This is what can bring people together. And this is what we have done, this is what we have tried, and step by step we have moved into a new form of dialogue, into a new system where indeed we are saying, look, we have to move beyond the supply chain. It's not only that experience. Just last week in the Belgian media, we have seen labels, and in particular then it was the RSPO, it was a label use or certification body for palm oil. It was criticized, and in a very strange way actually. It was criticized because, okay, the certified plantations, they might be good, but what about those that are not certified? And therefore, the label was untrustworthy. So even if you might be doing everything right in your supply chain, you might be sourcing from those plantations, from those counterparts that are doing everything the way we hope they would, the way that we think they should, the way that we've all agreed that is the right approach. If the neighbor is doing something else, it might be difficult, it might be different. That is why our call here and also in Belgium, to the Belgian government, to the EU government, is very simple. It's about more dialogue. It's about setting up a structured dialogue where we come together, not on an ad hoc level, not in a way that, okay, we meet each other every once in a while, but that we sit together on a regular basis and talk about those objectives that unite us all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Shilman. Now, in case you have not seen the hashtags that we're using, they have been written somewhere. I'm not sure exactly where, but they've been written somewhere. I'm just gonna spell them out for you. We have the hashtag ThinkLandscape and hashtag GLFBonn2017. In case you're posting things on social media that have to do with the landscape talks and with the GLF in general, then please make sure that you use those hashtags. And now to my next speaker. He is Daniel Murdiarso. And he's a scientist, actually a senior scientist at CIFOR, that is the Center for International Forestry Research. And he will try to answer the question, why care about peatlands? That is the point where you clap. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we started off this work about 2-3 years ago when we tried to put together the available data to see where peatlands are. And with very cost-effective kind of method using MODIS-based satellite imageries, we try to overlay a number of information, including land cover, soil, rainfall, terrain, etc. And then we managed to locate where wetlands are. And then we put together the information about organic material, organic carbon, and then we identify where peatlands are. So it was earlier this year, the work was published in Global Change Biology. With my colleagues here, we try to further develop how to make use of this information available globally. We put the information in the CIFOR website in a global wetland map. And one of the interesting findings that we had at that time was that we have more peats than what we knew before. And more interestingly is that there are more peatlands in Latin America than other places. And very recently, you've heard about the finding of peatland in Congo Basin, and that's been in our radar screen at that time. But again, the information is everywhere now about this issue of peatland, because it's very interesting to use this information for many purposes, especially when we come to an idea of mitigating climate change, because peatland is huge storage of carbon. It's only 3% of the Earth's surface, but holding more than 30% of the Earth carbon in the soil. So you can visit this website and look up and have a tour. And there are 10 different cover. Underneath is peat, and certainly the organic material is not decomposed completely because there are water. They are flooded, they are inundated. So it is important to think about having peatland mean that you have to have enough water to flood them up. So one thing that we think further about using this information is what happens if the water is gone, if the water is drained, if development like oil palm and pulpwood plantation coming, they really need to drain the water. So that's one indication that peatland is degrading or degraded. So we try to make use of this information further, and this method really is very early stage now, and trying to use the information about this spatial information and looking at the trend of rainfall compared with the trend of changing soil moisture, and use that algorithm to look at whether the decreasing rainfall affect the decreasing in soil moisture, or is it something else which causes decreasing soil moisture. which means some disturbance is going on, whether they are drain, human-induced disturbance, or they are rewetted because they want to have peatland environment back to normal. So rewetting is taking place. So the method really is to help countries to identify, to locate where degraded peatlands are, and this will help to plan how restoring peatlands should be and where, how much area are affected by this degradation. So with this simple kind of approach to look at the change in soil moisture as to oppose with the changing rainfall, we try to develop an algorithm to compare between the changing soil moisture and the changing rainfall. So if it is going to be red area, meaning that the area is affected by decreasing rainfall and occur at the same time also decreasing soil moisture, coincide. We do not know what's happening there. But if it is blue, that's the coding that we put there, it means that the increasing rainfall coincides with increasing soil moisture. So we give that score 9. The other one was 1. So something in between must be changing soil moisture, whether or not it's affected by rainfall. Then we can identify which area are draining and which area are rewetted. So we did some exercise very recently in Sumatra, in Kalimantan, in Indonesia. And you can see the bright red area are the area where decreasing rainfall coincides with decreasing soil moisture. And the other extreme is the bright blue, where increasing rainfall coincides with increasing soil moisture. So the yellowish or pink or orange color, meaning that there are something going on with regard to soil moisture due to human intervention. As well as the blue one, the bright blue one, is affected by human intervention. Maybe they are rewetting it or block the canal so that the water table increases. So we use this simple approach to look at whether degraded peatland or drained peatland can be identified and monitored. We use a long-term data from 2001 to 2016, so that we have a long-term kind of span in terms of information, and also occur at that time. During that time, maybe fire occurs as well. So we want to have very long-term one, so that we need to calibrate whether or not the decreasing soil moisture occurring because of human intervention. So what we are doing now is use this and map them up, and we use 3 pilot countries in Botswana, looking at the Okavango Delta, Indonesia, in Sumatra and Kalimantan, and then in Peru, in the Amazon, the Peruvian Amazon. We try to calibrate that situation by measuring soil moisture. At the moment, we try to install a number of equipment to monitor water table, and we'll calibrate that for soil moisture. So in this degraded situation, you can see here, it is both dry or drained as well as deforested. Peatland like that is considered as degraded. You need to have the source of organic material. You have to have vegetation back, and at the same time, you need to block canal like this so that the water level increases. So we did extensive measurement in central Kalimantan, and this is one of the examples to see how water table increases over time. But we cannot pick up the information back to 2001, of course, and we will find a way how to construct or reconstruct the data back to that period. But this long-term measurement is needed to calibrate what we know from the satellite. So at the moment, we have information like this everywhere in many district level to demonstrate how peatland is degrading or restored in terms of water table. So in the future, we are expecting that the use of map that we produced early this year will be more extensive to help countries identifying where degraded peatland are and what kind of intervention are needed in terms of rewetting and revegetating the area. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Daniel is from CIFOR, that is one of the organizations that organized the GLF. So if you have any questions for him, please after the last speaker. The last speaker is Maximilian Meyer. He is a researcher at the Center for Development Research at the university here in Bonn, and he'll talk about something that we've heard a number of times in the previous speeches and talks, but it will be a different angle. He will talk about palm oil, and especially about smallholder palm oil production in central Kalimantan. So, Daniel? No, not Daniel, sorry. Maximilian. You're welcome.
Thanks very much. The world's most hated crop. I guess everybody here in this room can think about what we want to talk about today. My name is Maximilian Meyer, as introduced, and today I would like to talk with you about palm oil production and also the research I'm involved in. The world's most hated crop was a title, it was a newspaper title that I read recently on Nature, and it shows me and it also shows you how controversially this topic is being discussed. This controversy can be attributed to a few factors. Oil palm is widely distributed in tropical countries such as Malaysia and Indonesia, and therefore it has some sort of omnipresence. It's always there in the landscape, right? You can see it a lot. It has also been attributed to economic growth, poverty elevation, and is an alternative to fossil fuels. On the other hand, it has some adverse environmental and socioeconomic impacts. This is a picture I took on a recent field trip to Borneo, and it shows you an orangutan mother with a child. And by the way, literally translated, orangutan means person of the forest. And if you have a look, they got really human-like expression. I've seen them live, and it really is amazing. Anyway, eventually their fate, and also the fate of other species, has been shown to be interconnected with the fast expansion of plantations, because plantations are being established at the expense of tropical forests. So what is my talk about? My talk is about small-scale or smallholder oil palm farmers, such as this guy. That is Argus. And why is Argus and why are other independent smallholders important? Because smallholders are the largest palm oil producer group in Indonesia and Malaysia. And Indonesia and Malaysia are the two countries producing the majority of palm oil globally. Therefore, smallholders are highly significant. The problem is, though, that quite a few of them, of these smallholders, underperform economically, which means that, for example, their yields are not as high as yields of company plantations. So Argus was the first person that we interviewed at our recent survey we took out in central Kalimantan, which was this year. Because we wanted to know what is determining how well guys like Argus and other independent smallholders perform in producing palm oil. And performing means, does it pay off for him, for Argus, and does it pay off for the society if he produces? So what we did, we took representative smallholders and we calculated if their production was profitable. And for this we used cost-benefit analysis. So what do we think we know? We think we know that the production for the farmer himself is profitable, but it's bad for the environment, right? That's what we think we know. So let's have a look at what came out. So what we see here is all the blue dots are farmers from the survey. And then the axes show the money the farmer on the horizontal line or the society on the vertical line the money that they either gain or lose if these farmers produce on 1 hectare over a period of 25 years. And what we see is, and the results show that down there, that's about 60%. So 60% of farmers are in this negative area. And this indicates that the investment for the farmer himself does not even pay off, right? Let alone for the society, right? Because we have externalities. We've discussed this a lot. And we also see that we have this line, 45-degree line, and all the dots are below this line. And this shows us that the production is less profitable for the society than compared to the farmer, because we have externalities again. And another interesting thing is kind of the average farmer. This is the blue dot. That's what you calculate. If you do the average of all these dots, this is what comes out. That's the average farmer. And it shows that he is in the positive profitability area for himself, but it's not profitable for the society. And the problem with this, what this leaves out, is that the majority of farmers having negative profitability, those guys down there, because they are offset by the other guys up there. And this leads me to my first message I have for you today, which is doubt the conventional wisdom. The conventional wisdom of palm oil production is profitable and plantations are extending because it's so profitable, right? We've seen that on average this is true, but we have to consider huge heterogeneity. And then these results lead to the question of what is determining profitability. And this then leads me to my next message, which is efficiency is key. What we've seen in the data is that farmers are not per se practicing low input agriculture, because in fact some of them apply decent amounts of fertilizer. But this does not mean that this automatically leads to high profitability, because we always have to consider the relation between input and output, which is efficiency, right? And this leads me to another message, the last message today, which is size does not always matter. This refers to the definition of smallholders, which has been historically based on size. What we did is we tried to build groups according to different parameters, such as size, and then we wanted to check, do these groups have distinct differences in these in performance? For example, do you have larger farmers, higher profitability? So what do you think the answer is? Have a little thought. And then let's also have a look at the data. Now this is the exact same graph as before, but now the dots are indicating how large the farmer is. And what we see is that we have large farmers up there, a really big one, and we have also large farmers down there. And we have small farmers down there, and we have large farmers up there. So the answer is no, there's no dependency. Because we have to consider other factors such as share of income from palm oil on total income, for example. Question is, what does this all tell us? What does it lead to, and what are the implications? Our findings are, generally speaking, not the final word on palm oil production, but they give some indications. They give indications and some entry points for policy action. Because it's not only important to govern which areas are being planted, but also how efficient production is secured. Because we don't want farmers to walk in some sort of economic trap where they invest into plantations and then in the end they are doomed to pay for cheap palm oil. So these entry points can be, for example, governance measures for farmers who are not producing yet, but they're thinking about getting into the business. And there we have to raise awareness that it's a little bit risky undertaking, because it can also be very unprofitable, right? And then other aspects are measures for farmers who are already in the business or already producing. And there we need to ensure that the efficient production. And for this, for example, certification needs to put major emphasis on efficiency. So in the long term, this may generate spillover effects on agricultural expansion. And there's, for example, more efficient smallholders will produce more palm oil on the same area, or vice versa, the same amount of palm oil is produced on less land. So thanks very much. If you have any further question, contact me here, or later we'll have a Q&A, I think. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Max. Max, I will not forget your name. You may just stay on the stage, because now I would ask the other speakers to come up here. And if we have any questions from the audience, then please raise your hand. Somebody will come with a mic, and you'll be able to ask us your question. All right, we can move to the center of the stage. So, any questions? If you have a question, please raise your hand. All right, we have one in the corner there.
Hi, thanks to everybody for the presentations. And I will have to apologize myself because I can't remember the name of the senior researcher from CIFOR who presented and who I want to ask something.
Daniel.
Daniel, thank you. Well, once again, thanks for your...
Have they turned it off? Okay, I think, Daniel, actually I need to take yours away because you still have yours there. That might be confusing our sound engineers. Okay, let's try again.
Yeah, it's working.
Perfect.
So you showed us that peatlands were found to be increasingly more abundant in Latin America, specifically in Peru, Colombia, and Brazil. And my question is very simple, actually. How are these peatlands defined, and what's the difference between a peatland and a swamp? Because actually, at least from the area in Peru, where actually I come from, the area where the peatland was mapped was considered, at least for me, and I know this is general common knowledge in Peru, that was a swamp. And I wonder whether that differences or the potential differences in classification are showing these differences on mapping peatlands. Thank you.
Okay. Can I talk with this?
I believe your mic is still on. Yeah.
Can you hear me? Good. Right. So there are 10 classes in the map that you can see it. Among others, peatland, peat swamp, mires, and also the type of wetlands. But for the particular peatland that we are talking about in terms of carbon storage, are those with carbon content more than 20%. And that's we consider as peatland in this map. And of course, the current states are different in terms of the cover. Like I saw you in Central Kalimantan, many of them are deforested, but the soil underneath is still there if it is not burned or drained, but it is still considered as peat, as organic material there. But the extent, we look at it from the satellite by overlaying the water regime. After having the rainfall, you have the evaporation, and then from that water budget, you can see the wet area as wetland, but if it's contain organic material at that percentage, we consider it as peatland. Yeah, the current, if you look at the full publication, the current area is much larger than what we knew before because of that classification. So we have now about 1.7 million square kilometers altogether, and in Latin America is very close to 500,000 square kilometers.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Anybody else? Yep, I see somebody there.
I have the microphone already. I have the question to the first speaker. also, I am sorry, but I forgot the name. Mark? Mike. I found your proposal intriguing, and I didn't know it before, but it looks a bit like carbon trading for RSPO obligations. What I'm wondering about is, certification is to a large extent voluntary, so your supply side is, your demand side is kind of, has an upper limit, which is sort of the willingness of companies to get certified, and your supply side is projects of which we still don't have a very good handle in terms of how effective they are in bringing about actual, I mean, some of them are certified, but still there might not be additional, yeah? So I'm wondering how much upscaling potential we really see unless we try to find better ways of forcing industry in certification schemes than just voluntary participation. Do you think sort of consumer awareness in Europe is enough, or do we need something else? And then I'd be curious whether you think there's some way of introducing the type of efficiency criteria that Max talked about at the end into those certification schemes and sort of scale that up.
Yeah, thank you very much. There's quite a lot in that to unpack. I mean, first of all, let me just sort of tackle the carbon trading question. The RSPO essentially set up a system which, as I said, uses proxies to identify what historical impact might have been of certain companies not doing what they should be doing. And the reason for that is because there are companies that entered the RSPO very early and might have cleared the land without the HCV assessment, without the environmental impact assessment. There are companies that are only now entering the system and are supposed to have fulfilled this particular criteria, this particular environmental assessment since 2005, and obviously they would not have done that. And the logic behind this is that we really want to expand the number of people entering the RSPO, which, as you say, is a voluntary standard. Because it's not just about environmental impacts, it's also about social impacts, it's about transparency, it's about legality, and so on. So we want to actually expand the number of people who are entering the RSPO system, but they can't do that unless there is some sort of a compensation for what might have happened in the past. Bearing in mind that these might have been growers who would not have even known that they should have done that environmental impact assessment. It's a way of allowing the door to be open to new members without allowing for misuse, for identification of loopholes. So you clear the land and then you enter the RSPO and then you're done with your responsibility. There is no mention of carbon within the compensation mechanism of the RSPO. What this is it's a liability is calculated on a hectare-for-hectare basis, and the compensation project that you are supposed to put that liability into should either equate those hectares, or those hectares can be turned into a dollar figure, which is again stipulated by the RSPO at $2,500. And that funding has to go to a conservation project. And what we found, again, as you say, is that we have 63 growers. If you turn the entire liability of the RSPO into the dollar figure, you're looking at about $170 million that should be going into conservation. And there are many growers there who simply don't know what projects they should be choosing. They simply don't know what the standards of the project should be. They don't know what the impact should look like. And that was actually my fear. You know, I was actually one of the people who set the system up. I sat on that multi-stakeholder body. And that was our fear for a very long time, but it's very difficult because there is no standardization of these projects. There are some under VCS systems, under CCBS, and, you know, and some other systems in terms of looking at impacts of these projects on the ground. But actually, there is a huge variety within these projects. Some are already certified, some are really just starting out. And we really need to level that as well. We do need to bring that up. We do need to start looking at standardization of monitoring impact of these projects as well. But they need a lot of support in order to be able to get to that level and actually be able to compensate the liability of the companies. So it's a huge topic. I'm very, very happy to talk to you more about it. I just don't want to take up too much time.
Thank you for being considerate. Thank you, Mike. Do we have any more questions from the audience? We still have a couple more minutes. Yeah, please. We have somebody here in the front row.
All right. I have a question to Maximilian's presentation. Thank you very much for this interesting information on oil palm. I was a bit surprised when I saw in your comparison of the private profit for the farmer and the social profit that it's always below the line, because I saw that recent research also indicates that that the nutritional standards, for example, rise in the families, not even in the families, also in the surrounding villages, and also education can be promoted. So yeah, leads me to my question, which positive externalities did you take into account to answer the question whether it's a profit for society or not? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question. So for externalities, we included, I didn't mention this, but we included the land use change. We included the peat oxidation if the plantation is planted on peat. Then we included the emissions that are generated when I apply fertilizer as a farmer, and the production of the fertilizer, and also the production of the herbicides. So those are the externalities we include, and we put on top of the cash flow, of the private cash flow. So we have a private cash flow just for the farmers, and then we add up externalities. So, and these externalities are, in most cases, their costs, right? Because we have emissions. In some cases, when you have a farm that is that has been farmland, for example, and then you have carbon sequestration, therefore you have benefits. But what you're referring to is not included in our cash flow, because that would be, that would the system boundaries is that's just too big to incorporate, right? So thanks. It's a good point.
Thank you very much, Max. Are there any more questions? I can take one final one. Okay, if we don't have any questions, then we've come to the end of the Landscape Talks for today. Before you leave, let me just tell you that there will be a plenary here that will start at 6, I believe. I'm not very sure. Yeah, it will start at 5:45. It'll start at 5:45. Among others, you will have the yogi and visionary Sadhguru. He'll be in conversation with the UN Environmental Program head, Eric Solheim. So that is something that you should not miss. It will happen right here at this venue. And we will have more talks, more landscape talks tomorrow at 9. So thank you very much for being here. Thank you for participating. Thank you for your questions. And of course, a very big thank you to my speakers.